Braun backtracks assurances on IU trustees. Indiana begins the process of reinstating A through F ratings, plus a venture capital fund and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending June 6, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.
Governor Mike Braun terminated 3 elected IU trustees this week, exercising his new authority from a last-minute change to the state budget. He did so despite recent assurances that he planned to let them serve until the end of their terms. Braun said Tuesday the trustees were close to finishing their terms anyway, and lots of candidates had applied to replace them.
With that kind of enthusiasm and the fact that it really didn't make a lot of difference one way or the other, did make the decision to go ahead and do it.
One former trustee, Vivian Winston, was a month away from finishing her term, but 2 others had 1 and 2 years respectively left in their terms. One of Braun's picks is conservative lawyer James Bopp Jr. He gained notoriety for his opposition to same-sex marriage, abortion, and the results of the 2020 presidential election. The Board of Trustees will meet next Thursday to approve next year's university budget. Braun has called for a tuition freeze. What does Braun's flip on removing Indiana University's trustees signal for the university? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes, host of Indiana Lawmakers, and Kaitlin Lange, government and politics editor for the Indianapolis Star. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting digital editor Lauren Chapman, in for Brandon this week, who is celebrating his 89th birthday. John, is Governor Braun's backtrack more notable than the people that he appointed?
I'm still stuck on the birthday. But, okay. There's enough concern to go around. I think you can look at this several ways, and there's all sort of troubling or disappointing. If you look at going back on one's, I don't think it was written anywhere. He didn't pledge it. He didn't open a vein and put blood oath out anywhere. But I mean, especially if you're in the public eye and you're the chief officer, executive officer of the state, when you say something, you want it to carry weight. So that's a little troubling. And the notion that there's enthusiasm surrounding the position and that triggers, an expedition of the whole process. I mean, if that's the bar, there are a lot of things that can trigger emotion and responses. And I'm sure people wanting to have free tickets to IU football games and basketball games is a good motivator. On a more serious level, the identities of the individuals, 2 of them are fairly high profile. No offense to Ryan Eagle, who's an attorney, deals with estates and real estate. Seems like a fine, accomplished attorney here in Indianapolis. The other 2 certainly do have high profiles. Jim Bopp has, counted among his clients Citizens United, various pro-life groups. He's been very much a national leader arguing before the U.S. Supreme Court on some of the highest profile cases of the past couple of decades. Very outspoken. And then Sage Steele, who's certainly a prominent member of the proud graduate of the institution, but had some difficulties with ESPN where she was employed, went her own way, but was a surrogate for Donald Trump on the last campaign. Some had spread rumor that she might even be the press secretary, although I think she sort of poo-pooed that. So there are people with strong opinions about how the university should run, and it seems to fall in line with this notion that starts in the White House in the Oval Office and goes on down, that these somehow are research institutions or bastions of liberalism that have somehow, or worse, those are the kind ways to put it, and need to somehow be brought into line. So, yeah, like I say, enough concern to go around.
Yeah. Kaitlin, what should, especially folks who, didn't attend IU, don't have kids who are attending IU, What does this mean for Hoosiers? Should they, is this a step, over some imaginary line?
Yeah, I think I actually wasn't as interested in Braun's backtracking as the fact that lawmakers added this provision in last minute anyways. I mean, sure, Braun made that promise, but it was after, or not promise, he made that sort of commitment, yes, after the bill had already been passed, after lawmakers had already inserted this language in, the final days of session. So I think that, to me, was kind of more interesting about this whole thing, is it's part of this broader scope of trying to insert more influence over these universities, because in addition to this IU provision, we also had a provision in there making it easier to sort of remove tenured professors and also to, sort of give the Commission for Higher Education the ability to nix hundreds of bachelor degree programs across the state if they don't have enough people in these programs. And, obviously, the Commission for Higher Education can choose, whether they want to allow some programs to continue or not. So I think it's this broader sort of emphasis of trying to insert a little bit more influence on these higher education institutions.
Well, I would say it's not even just insert influence on higher ed, it's specific things that happen in some of these universities, because this goes back with State House Republicans, it goes back before this session. You can track it back even to 2023 when they tried to defund the Kinsey Institute, where there's been groundbreaking research over many years over sexuality, gender identity, reproductive health. So it is really concerning to see folks like Jim Bopp appointed, who have very specific ideologies when it comes to this, who have made very specific harmful policies when it comes to this type of ideology, who are now inserted into that decision making. I think this is, like Kaitlin said, this is broad, and history doesn't necessarily speak well to folks that insert kind of an authoritarian mentality to academic spaces or research spaces. And so, if they can do this to one institution, they can do it to many. And so Hoosiers should be looking at this with some concern.
Mike O'Brien, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think it would have been weird if he kept them, if he hadn't replaced them with this, using this authority. It's like, it's like your employer walks into your office and says, "We don't like the direction you're taking the company. You're fired, but not till 2027. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. Just if you, regardless of what you think of whatever the agenda might be, from a process standpoint, it's like, well, he won the election. He's got this authority. He's in charge. Go do it. Go execute the authority. You got to live with it. You got to live with whatever the changes that you're going to make. And this isn't a Donald Trump v. Harvard situation. It's the university's been entirely silent on this, and the presumption at the State House is this is what they wanted and asked for. And so it's not, this wasn't, the governor breathing down the neck of Indiana University. It seems like they're partners in this.
I think, though, people tend to forget that usually in government, in these kinds of arenas, people fulfill the obligations to which they commit and are elected. So, for instance, we used to have an elected state superintendent of public instruction here. And clearly the Republicans didn't like that. They felt that it should be.
Democrats didn't either, by the way.
Right. Well, whoever was in control of the governor's office didn't like it, is what it came down to. But the argument was, because education is such a big component of the state's agenda, that the governor should have the say. But that was enacted, but it didn't mean that the old superintendent, what are you doing here? You're still in your office. Clear out. Get out of here.
That was Plan A. The political decision was made to let her fulfill the rest of her term.
Well, I think that's the only logical thing, just to say this person was elected by the voters. Let's let this person fulfill that term.
That wasn't a philosophical decision. That was a politically driven one.
So wouldn't this have been the same thing? Shouldn't this have been politically driven and let them stay?
Not when the politics support you.
Well, that's. I mean, the issue here, it's not going to affect students, undergraduates. The problem, as I've said before, is with recruiting, with the reputation of the institution, maybe with grad students and others and the scholars who care about such things. And the problem is it's insidious because you don't know when things have gone south until all of a sudden you're not being able to attract the best and brightest. You're not spewing forth the kinds of breakthrough developments and scholarship that that institution is known for. We already saw a New York Times piece this week that which I'm sure was read by a few people across the country that called into question some of the decisions here. So it's insidious, but it's a bad path to be on, it seems to me.
Time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. This week's question: are Governor Braun's changes good for Indiana University? Vote A for yes or B for no. Last week's question: is the sale of U.S. steel to a Japanese company good for Indiana steelworkers? 32% of you voted yes and 68% voted no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. This week, the Indiana Capitol Chronicle reported the Indiana Department of Education unveiled its first draft of a sweeping new school accountability proposal. It marks a major step forward toward replacing the state's previous A through F grading system with a model that instead values the unique skills and strengths of each student. The proposal, shared at the Indiana State Board of Education's June meeting, outlines a point-based system designed to measure a broader range of student outcomes, from academic proficiency to work-based learning and attendance, as well as soft skills like communication and collaboration. The school performance model is still in development and must undergo a months-long rulemaking process that includes multiple rounds of public comment and revisions. IDOE Chief Innovation Officer Ron Sandlin says the new model moves away from evaluations based on a single assessment.
The proposed model is intentionally designed to encourage schools to support and nurture the unique skills and strengths of each student.
A final version is expected to be adopted by the state board by December. State law now requires the first round of school grades under the new system to be issued in fall 2026. Kaitlin, given how many states have walked away from these ratings, what's the motivation for bringing them back?
I think proponents would argue it just makes it easier for parents to be able to look at, what schools do I want to send my child to? I'm in the process of moving, actually, and I did go and look for all those lists that exist out there of which schools are ranked where, and I actually used it, and it kind of would have been nice to have something a little bit more concrete. But I can also see the other side as well, the concern that these ratings don't always take into effect that students are coming to the schools from different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and that you can't necessarily put one letter grade for everything about what a school does. And then there's also just the concern that this is just kind of free advertising for some of these schools. And some argue that perhaps a better indicator would be, did the school pass or did it fail? Just two options. But again, that doesn't make it as easy for parents when they're trying to decide, okay, where do I want to move so I can decide where my kid should go to school someday?
Yeah. John Schwantes, A through F ratings in a very weird way have become interestingly partisan. So just a few years ago, there were 11 or 12 states. Now we've whittled down to, I believe, 8. And there are a lot of specifically Republican proponents that say that these A through F ratings, much to Kaitlin's point, are a tool for parental choice. Given what that first draft looks like, is Indiana, creating another tool to make it a little bit easier for parental choice, or is this a little bit too in the weeds for partisanship?
Well, it seems to me you can't have too much information if you're a parent or a student, and you want to know how schools are performing. And as far as accountability and taking schools to task, that goes back and forth. And the partisanship aspect of it flips. Common Core started out as a Republican initiative nationally until it wasn't, until it was the hated, the boogeyman of Republicans. And who knows? It goes back and forth depending on circumstance. But more information, it seems to me, is better. And because it's more nuanced and there is now an allowance for individuals who are showing progress. They may never, hit whatever the perfect score is. I don't remember, it's been so long since I took either the ACT or the 1600 or whatever. But still, they're getting some credit for, doing what they can do and improving. So, there's a huge question that needs to be answered still, which is what happens, even once this is finalized and put in place, what happens to schools that are chronically failing? Mm-hmm. That's, just the school before in the old setup, the state was obliged to, or at least had the opportunity to take them over. I don't think that's been determined yet. Mm-hmm.
Mike, I mean, again, there seems to be a lot of interesting partisan undercurrents to these ratings.
Well, there's partisan undercurrents to every single part of education.
Yeah.
It's just a partisan set of debate. My guess is, I don't know this for a fact, but my guess is Democrats tend to represent urban centers that are going to have poor performing schools, and Republicans are representing rich suburban schools that are probably going to have better, more resourced and get better grades. I don't understand the controversy behind it. I understand the debate of how do we arrive at the grade, because what bakes into that, and what grades, and why is that grade kicking out? So that's totally fair, and I think that's the meaningful debate here, which is like, okay, what is going into that grade? Having transparency on, and the reason it's popular is because it's easy to understand. We could rate it by emoji, we could rate it by whatever. It's like what is baking into that score, the complexity of that school, the challenges that are beyond. You have a wealthy area shouldn't be graded the same as a complex urban area where you have a lower income. So it's all that.
I would say it's even more than suburban and urban. It's rural and urban have a lot in common with being underserved, and again, we've talked about this before on the show. If we're going to talk about truancy rates and attendance, we're also going to have to talk about if folks have enough food, if kids have enough nutrition, if their families can get them to school, how many jobs their families are working, because right now families are working 1, 2, and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And at the same time, at the State House, Republicans are cutting on my way pre-K programs. So students are entering the school system without those benefits that we know come from early education, because they're not going to have access to that early education. So there are just so many factors that go into this. And one thing I will say is so many of these topics that we talk about around this desk have already been done. They've already been signed, but there is still opportunity for public comment. The first draft came out. For the next 30 days, they're taking public comment. There's going to be a second draft. There's opportunity for public comment again. So this is a time where, people who are watching this now, folks should be providing that public input, because this is a local issue. This is your neighbors. This is your community. So I really hope people take up that public comment time, because it's a local issue. And I would just close in saying, these accountability assessments should be applied to anyone that receives state funding.
The Indianapolis Business Journal reported on a fund created a year ago, managed by Elevate Ventures, the Indianapolis-based nonprofit that invests federal and state money into companies on behalf of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. Governor Mike Braun has frozen funding earmarked for Elevate Ventures, with little explanation about why or how the move will impact the nonprofit's ability to invest in new startups. The growth fund would target growth stage companies, and at least $50 million of the ultimate fund would be invested in companies with a significant presence in Indiana. The $25 million the state planned to use to seed the fund is already in an Elevate Ventures account. The money came from returns earned on investments in early startups Elevate made on behalf of the state, and an IEDC committee has approved its use for the growth fund. But Elevate leaders can't spend any of that money until the organization raises at least some money from outside investors. Mike O'Brien, is this fund getting caught up unfairly?
We're going to find out. I mean, that's why the governor ordered the audit, and I don't know that they thought anything illicit was happening, other than it's just a lot of money, and that kind of program, no matter what it is, it's been around for, 16 years, 15 years, with that much money flowing through it. And, there's been, suggestions, been criticism from lawmakers that the IEDC isn't as transparent as they'd like it with the amount of money flowing through it. You should be taking a look at this, at these things from time to time, regardless of whether you think everything is going great or maybe there's a problem. So I don't think it's caught up unfairly. I think it just, we just need eyes on this if we're spending taxpayer money.
Well, and especially for this particular fund, which I think was only launched a year ago.
I thought this company was managing that money
that company
with
was
an
managing,
IEDC for,
yes,
for
but
some
this,
time.
but
just
yes,
this fund.
just
Okay.
this specific fund. I mean, you're talking about $25 million from the state that is currently frozen up at this point. You know, do you think that it makes sense to, while like getting everything else in order, to just keep this money frozen?
Well, I think they've been keeping it frozen while they're looking to make sure it's being spent appropriately. They are looking, you know, state government wide for efficiencies and places to go find money and close funding gaps and, you know, review contracts. And so it's not unique to this. This is probably the highest profile because IEDC has just been a high profile. They're doing this throughout state government with, you know, all contracts and doing a comprehensive assessment.
Elise, basically same question. Is this fund getting unfairly tied up in this investigation of IEDC?
Well, I mean, yeah, we are going to find out.
Yeah.
And I think for a very long time, people have been wondering what's going on behind the curtain on all of this funding, because there's so much that gets, you know, funneled this way, and at the same time, we've been asked to cut and cut and cut for so many programs. So I think there are questions that need to be answered. I also think when we look at this type of economic development, a lot of it tends to stay central Indiana focused, and there are folks outside in the state that are trying, you know, where maybe some of maybe there are less people with access to this capital exists that need to have the same type of access, that we could be widening our focus. So I think by looking at this and having maybe a new start, it could be a great way for others, maybe not so central Indiana focused, to benefit more rural, more outside of central Indiana, southern Indiana, north central Indiana, to be able to benefit from this.
Yeah. Kaitlin, you know, especially in that broader context of the IEDC, you know, was this a misstep for the state to invest, you know, a not insignificant chunk of change into what is essentially a venture capital fund?
Yeah, I think a lot of that just depends on your philosophy in terms of, I mean, sure, there's a lot we don't know right now if anything was done, you know, incorrectly or wrongly in this case, but a big part of this is also just philosophical of, yeah, how much money do you think should be going toward economic development? How much should be going toward, you know, this sort of setup where, you know, you are investing in things outside of state, outside of, you know, the state, I mean. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a good question, all of that. I do wonder with the IEDC things, I think more transparency is definitely good. I think it's been a long time coming. It's really needed, but I do also wonder, you know, in this case, for example, will this company be able to still get outside funders because of all the uncertainty? And, you know, I think about the LEAP district as well. I do think that there's still a good amount of uncertainty about what's going to happen there now that we have a new governor, now that we had all that water controversy. And again, you can think the LEAP district is good or bad, but I do wonder if that has, you know, made some companies a little bit more weary about looking into the LEAP district. So I think you can ask that question about all of these things when you have a transition from governor to a new governor, even if he is in the same political party.
Totally. John, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it is a matter, I think, you're right, Kaitlin, of philosophy. And part of this is, should government run like a business? We often hear that. And the argument for making this, having this arrangement in the first place was, let's you know, let these people be unfettered. They're dealing with businesses and entrepreneurs who, you know, turn on a dime. And we know the government tends to be plotting. That's with a D, not a T. And it may not be work. And so this is what we ended up with. And these things tend to be a pendulum anyway and kind of settle back and forth. So we're going through that now. But I mean, at the core, it is that notion. Is there something fundamentally different about government, since they're dealing with our collective interest and our collective funds, that separate it in a profound fashion from business? Maybe it can't or shouldn't run at the speed of business.
Totally. And finally, a Purdue University robotics team has created a robot named Purdubix, thank you, Mike, Cube, to solve a Rubik's Cube. It sets a Guinness World Record, solving the puzzle in just 0.013 seconds, faster than the blink of an eye. Kaitlin, should I personally be concerned that my one marketable skill, which is solving a Rubik's Cube, has been taken over by a robot?
I don't want to turn everything all dark, but I just feel as journalists, I'm like concerned for a whole host of other reasons there.
Coming for us all.
It's coming for us.
That was really impressive, Lauren.
Thank you
So-
so
I've never
much.
done it once in my life.
Yeah,
Forget
I
how many
tried.
seconds. You can show me. I'll
To be
I'll be
fair, if someone
appreciative.
asked me to solve a Rubik's Cube, I'd probably be like, AI, how do I solve this?
No, not that. Are we losing our specialties to robots?
Well, you do it with more panache than any robot.
Well,
That's
Yeah,
my.
can AI do it while talking? No.
Yeah, and
Probably.
I want to see it manipulate the real not virtual cubes. Oh, there we go.
The physical cube.
Yeah, the physical cube. Talk to me when it can do the physical cube.
Exactly. Well, that's Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Elise Shrock, Republican Mike O'Brien, John Schwantes of Indiana Lawmakers, and Kaitlin Lange of the Indianapolis Star. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at WFYI.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Lauren Chapman of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next week, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations. Additional support is provided by the Indy Chamber, working to unite business and community to maintain a strong economy and quality of life.